Thank you, Scott, and hello, everybody. Good evening or good morning, wherever you may be in the world. I know we have some people from far away tonight. Yeah, I do want to talk. Interestingly, I've talked a lot about some of these components before, but I've never really kind of named some of the things I do as dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And I think it's just an important, really important set of practices and skills that are so useful, not only for a lot of different disorders, but for kind of life in general. But I wanted to talk just briefly about it and the four major components that we use a lot, just to kind of put it together and put a name on it for people that don't know it. Dialectical behavioral therapy started in the put together in the late 1980s by Marcia Linehan, who still does some training on it. And it was really designed to treat borderline personality disorder, which is a tough thing to treat. And it's a great set of skills that really focuses on emotional regulation and self-examination and that kind of thing. We'll go over those in a second. But in the years since, what we've discovered is that it's useful for all kinds of things besides borderline personality, bipolar disorder, bulimia, generalized anxiety disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and for our purposes, most importantly, any kind of addictive disorder. It really works well with binge kind of diseases like binge eating disorder, alcohol, sex addiction, all those things work really well. And just as you'll see in a moment, the skills are really kind of just universal. And they're basically helps people really teach themselves how to modify and control their behavior, which is really one of the essential tasks really in recovery from addiction particularly. The first one is something I talk about here a lot, and that's really just mindfulness, core mindfulness, which really are mindfulness skills, probably the most important, kind of the central feature of DBT. And it's really to focus on living in the moment. And I always talk about with our clients seeking integrity that, how much of us spend time stuck in the future or stuck in the past, but not really right here in the present moment. And if you just examine your own life through the day, you'll see that it's really kind of hard to stay right in the present. Most of us are hijacked one way or the other. But this just teaches people to pay attention to what's happening right here and now. And one of the essential elements that people sometimes skip over in this is to be non-judgmental about it. And that simply means I observe, but I don't put a value on it. I may be seeing something I don't like. I can acknowledge I don't like that. What feeling does it elicit in me? How am I reacting? But without judging my reaction, saying that's stupid. Why do you feel that way? Self-talk, just to really see and notice what's going on, both from internal and from external. So from internal, what's going on inside my thoughts, my feelings, my sensations, my impulses. This is what's really useful for addiction, to really examine triggers and cues, but also from outside. What's going on? What do I see? What do I smell? What do I hear? What do I touch? These are the same things we use in any kind of mindfulness exercise to just really ground us in the present. And so that's a really essential things. And this really just helps slow down, learn about ourselves. We can really start to understand, put together a map of our triggers and cravings and what sets us off and what strengths we have. And we really can notice ourselves as we go through our life. And really it creates these patterns that really help us counteract impulsive kind of behaviors that can really set an addict off. How many times have I heard from a client, they're doing fine, not even looking to act out or to use drugs, and some cue will come on and just, boy, their brain is hijacked in a flash. And so these are things that really help us kind of recenter ourselves and bring us back. The second important thing after core mindfulness is what we call distress tolerance. And that distress tolerance means simply just accepting ourselves in the present situation and learning how to tolerate uncomfortable feelings or even a crisis in the worst case scenario, but using really 4 different techniques. And by the way, one of the big problems, we often think of, distress tolerance and learning about our emotions, and it would be some painful emotion, grief, overwhelming sadness, panic, anxiety. But ironically, one of the biggest uncomfortable emotions a lot of our sex addicts and porn addicts and chemsex addicts experience is boredom, because these are all sensation, stimulation addictions, and boredom is something that needs to learn. Also, people need to learn how to tolerate it. But we do a couple ways. Distraction, simple distraction, and that can be making a call, doing something else, stopping, just disengaging, going off and doing something different for a while. Because, you know, although there's all this talk in our society now about multitasking, that's really an impossibility. Our brains can't multitask. We just do very rapid switching back and forth between things. So if we really distract ourselves or immerse ourselves in something totally different, our brains will at least have a temporary respite from whatever it is that has grabbed them. Self-soothing, learning how to self-soothe. You know, a sex addict self-soothe with masturbation or acting out or fantasy, and just learning better healthy ways to calm ourselves down and tolerate things. How we can improve the situation. What can we do? So then we're not stuck with this attitude of being a victim or being powerless. You know, almost in every situation, there's something we can do, if only to make ourselves feel better about it somehow. And then finally, the pros and cons, kind of doing a little, engaging the frontal cortex, the front part of our brain, to help us kind of see what we can do. And this is where the serenity prayer really speaks to us, you know, really evaluating what we have the power to change, what we can't, and to really know that difference. That's the second thing. The third thing would be what they call interpersonal effectiveness. And that boils down, I think, to a lot of just assertiveness skills, really healthy communication, speaking our mind, not being aggressive, not being passive or passive aggressive, but just really becoming more assertive. You know, and what would example of that be? Saying no. You know, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that. No. Or asserting our needs. I really need X, Y, Z. You know, one of the things we teach our clients at Seeking Integrity is that a lot of addiction stems from unmet emotional needs. And so one of the first steps in meeting those needs is to identify them. And so often we don't even know what we need. We're just feeling bad, or we're feeling unloved, or we're feeling needy for some reason. And it's really important to kind of put a name on those and do something about it. What else? Keeping relationships positive. Oh, the other big thing about this that's important, I think, is listening, active listening, healthy listening, where we stay engaged. If someone's telling us something, we, you know, have body language that echoes that. We ask questions that show that we've listened. We may repeat something, you know, so you say, or I hear you say X, Y, Z. That kind of thing really keeps us connected, and it's very, very helpful. So all this is that increasing that example of interpersonal connectedness. And then the fourth one is emotional regulation, which really is so important, because especially addiction, especially in early recovery, emotions are so powerful. People are starting to wake up, right? An addict has been kind of numbed or distracted or hijacked by a particular emotion, sadness, anxiety, grief. And so we start to experience all these different emotions, and learning how to regulate them, learning how to know what to do with them can be a new trick. So, and this really helps people reduce their emotional vulnerability. They're not a victim of their emotions pulling them up and down. They learn how to self-soothe, how to control their emotions, how to not give in to really strong emotions, which can really just push an addict off balance. Really, any addict in recovery could be vulnerable to that, but I think especially in early recovery, they're most vulnerable to that. So that, in a very quick nutshell, people spend years studying this, but that was a really flash review of DBT, the 4 core skills, which are mindfulness, learning how to tolerate distress, increasing your interpersonal effectiveness, and finally, how to regulate emotions. So,
yeah, we should file regulating emotions away as a topic for a whole webinar, probably.
Yeah.
But just real quick, dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Similarities, differences? I know they're both used with addicts. Is there
right? So
one over the other?
Cognitive behavioral therapy is really kind of the grandfather of them all. That really, they all kind of, there's many different versions of cognitive behavioral therapy that emerged from that. And cognitive behavioral therapy really links our thoughts and our beliefs, and how those kind of combine to form an emotion, and how that we can control our emotions by going back and changing how we interpret things, our thoughts and beliefs. So it's a really deceptively simple formula to look at things, but it's a tremendously important and powerful skill. Where this comes in, it kind of builds on those on those core notions, but it really expands it in a way that I think is tremendously productive by incorporating some of the mindfulness piece, a little bit of meditative kind of Zen flavor to it, really teaching people not just how to control their thoughts, but really when they have feelings, how to do that emotional regulation. What it does, I think it's kind of an enhanced, it's a value added version of CBT, where you learn all these extra things, how to communicate more effectively, how to control your emotions more effectively. And it just kind of really rounds it out. And I think in a way that's really quite brilliant, actually.
I think a lot of therapists who've done CBT forever, because that's what they learned, are doing DBT sort of piecemeal anyway. They've learned to incorporate all of the extra stuff over the years. So most of the time, if somebody says they do CBT or DBT, they're doing the same thing, I think.
I think you're exactly right. In fact, I never really had formal training in DBT early on, but I sort of naturally came upon different pieces of it, like mindfulness and emotional regulation. And suddenly I realized I kind of had reinvented that cluster of things myself. But what the advantage is, once you kind of have that awareness of those different skills, DBT and DBT training provides all kinds of workbooks, and they've really taken that and run with it. So there's an incredible amount of tools available for those different skills.
Yeah, I think it's well named. Both of those approaches, however they're interpreted, are well named because they work really well with behavioral issues, and addiction is a behavioral issue at its core.
Right. I think one of the mistakes a lot of addiction therapists make is to really get too much caught up in thoughts and up here. And I think an addict really needs to mind some of those emotions and then learn how to control all that stuff. It's like your systems are coming back online and you don't have the skills to control it. And so it's really helpful for an addict.
Yeah, and a year or so in, when the addiction's under control and you've got some good sobriety and some support, you can do that deeper, psychoanalysis, kind of digging into the trauma and the post-traumatic stress and all the underlying causes. But in the beginning, we need to get sober first, and then we deal with the rest of it.
And yeah, let me just underscore that point, Scott, because it's so important. I think DBT and all these skills are all about the here and now. They're all things that can help the addict get through today or tonight and tomorrow and this week and really learn and build. Trauma work is incredibly important as well. And we know trauma underlies a good bit of addiction, but we also have seen a lot of clients whose therapist inadvertently got them into trauma work too soon and without all the emotional skills to deal with some of the stuff that the trauma brought up. And so I think trauma work is really important, but the timing of when to do it is really incredibly important. So yeah, a caution.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, just a reminder, if you want to ask questions, please do so. Use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll just take them in the order we get them. We've got several in there already. So the first one says, I am a gay man and ask questions about anything, what David presented or whatever's going on in your life and your recovery. We'll be happy to answer. I'm a gay man with sex and meth addictions. Many single gay men find sex through hookup apps or at bathhouses. Both avenues can easily lead me to meth. Do you recommend that chemsex addicts, that's usually paired meth and sex, to permanently quit both? If so, what is the safe and healthy alternative to finding sex after an initial period of sexual abstinence? Great question. And right up David's alley.
Yeah. I don't see that question here, but it was a great question. So a couple really important points there. One is the apps. We know that we're getting increasing amounts of data now on apps. Apps meaning, Tinder or Scruff or Grindr, all the things that are so common right now on our phones. And it's just caused an explosion of, I think, a lot more hookups, and it's just so easy not only to find a sex partner, but to find drugs as well. That chemsex is pairing drug use and sex. So what we know, though, about dopamine, which is this neurotransmitter that we talk about a lot, but it's all about anticipation and desire. It's all about starting to drool over what might come. And we know that just like Pavlov's dog, which learned early on and would start to drool when certain things were in place, the ritual that someone might use for chemsex and hooking up involves the phone. And we know that from brain studies that even if somebody starts to pull out their phone out of their pocket, their brain is lighting up almost as if they had ingested the meth already. And so our brains are like anticipating it. I had a question on another website in the rooms a couple weeks ago, and the guy was talking about how he got triggered. He hadn't used meth, but his body felt like he'd used meth. He had all the physical sensation he gets when he uses, even though he hadn't even used it yet. And so those apps are really powerful. And I've had clients who would go online because they are a primary way of meeting people. And they go on looking for friends, or not even looking for sex, maybe, at least in their conscious mind. But it's a really dangerous place. It's a slippery place to be, because people are looking for sex. People lie in their profiles. They may say no party and play, and they lie. And so I think it's no place for an addict to be. And I know that especially for the younger guys, that seems kind of hard to figure out because it seems it's such a natural part of social life. So what do you do instead? At Seeking Integrity, we talk about dating plans, right? When you're ready, when you think you're ready, to go out and start slow. And by that we mean meeting for coffee, arriving in 2 cars, 30-minute coffee date, leave. And not necessarily have sex on the first date. I recommend getting out of a hookup mentality, and not because I'm a prude or anything like that, but I think for an addict who's been in that behavior, just like our bodies know when we're pulling out the phone, there's something about the excitement of a hookup, and also there's something about the lack of an interpersonal connection that I think is really not very helpful for people. There's I think a lot of loneliness and this desire for connection, and so I think we really need to connect. We want to connect, and then good sexually when the time is right for you. But I think it depends on how we do it. I think getting out of hookups, getting out of those quick kind of anonymous settings, and really starting to practice more healthy communication, getting to know someone. I jokingly talk to my clients about getting a first name, but I mean just getting to know someone a little better. And that also helps, because a lot of these addictions, both sex and porn addiction and chemsex addiction, are what we call intimacy disorders, meaning that they're often people that have trouble really feeling vulnerable, having trust, really connecting with someone at a deeper level. And ironically, the drugs often help people move past that and feel, either invincible or they don't care about feeling unworthy but I think without the drugs, it's important and an opportunity to practice learning how to really build healthy relationships. And by the way, I'll shut up after this. I think the ability to have just friendships, non-sexual friendships, is a really important skill in this as well. Especially as a gay man, I think a lot of gay men have sex and then they become friends. Just try the friendship and see what happens, and see if that's maybe not as fulfilling or more fulfilling.
Yeah, for thousands of years, people did not need apps to meet each other and have relationships. It is possible. The human race did not die out before apps. Join the softball league. Every city has a gay softball league. Or if you're not into that, there's always a club or something that you can join and meet people and make some friends. And friends of friends, or who, how you meet people. Somebody has a dinner party and you meet somebody nice, or but yeah, stay off the apps and stay out of bathhouses, especially because if they lead you to meth, you need to walk away from them.
Yeah, and I didn't even talk about bathhouses too, but I just totally agree. Bathhouses are really just dangerous places for people.
Yeah, sex addicts should not be in a bathhouse.
There's a lot of drugs there.
Bad idea.
Yeah.
I'm a partner of a man in recovery from sex addiction. It's been about 5 years since D-Day. There was some further disclosure about 6 months ago, and now I'm having a traumatic physical response. I can't bear my partner touching me in any way. If he's even close to me, I freak out. What's going on?
Yeah, a great question as well. I think to answer that, we have to kind of explain a lot of what happens with the partners of sex addicts and what's in terms of the traumatic response. There's actually a lot of PTSD that's diagnosed in partners of sex addicts just because their whole world has been really, the rug's pulled out from under them. I've had clients over the years who, married 20 or 30 years, and suddenly they find out through some accident that their husband that they thought they knew and shared a life with and raised their kids with had been having a series of affairs, long-term emotional affairs with people, for 25 years. That just totally pulls the rug out from someone, and there's a lot of trauma, and so partners are really seeking safety. They're seeking how to kind of reassure themselves, and the idea of disclosure, which is where the sex addict discloses in a very formal way the extent of their addiction and their history, is such an important event that we put a lot of time into it, including a lot of therapeutic preparation. One of the most jarring and hurtful things I think that can happen to someone are what we call kind of a staggered disclosure or a rolling disclosure, where maybe you get caught. If I'm a sex addict, I get caught, and I tell my partner, yeah, well, I was doing this and this, but I don't tell him or her about all the other stuff. And then maybe, so they finally, okay, they get their balance, they get their feet under themselves, my partner, and 6 months later, something else comes out. And that kind of staggered disclosure is just incredibly traumatic, because once you think you're starting to reestablish safety and trust, it's pulled out from under you again. And so I think the reaction you're having is really quite typical, for somebody who's really having a stress response. And then the fact that you don't want them to touch you, I think, is also typical, because really what's going on here? It's trust, vulnerability. How can you feel comfortable and safe? And I use that word safe, physically and emotionally, with someone who's basically a stranger to you for doing these things. And so for the person that wrote the question, the partner, I really encourage you to get a therapist if you don't have one, just to help you deal with the feelings and provide support for you. And the therapists we recommend are the CSATs, the Certified Sex Addiction Therapists, who've had a lot of formal training and disclosure, and more than that, on the effects of partners on partners, and not because it's anything you've done wrong or anything that's wrong with you, but it's really just give you the support in these moments and figure out how you can effectively kind of regain a sense of your life and control over your life, with or without your partner, whatever that means. So yeah, your response is really normal, unfortunately, but there are people out there that really understand it and that can help you. So I'd encourage you to look up, I don't know where you are, but if you go to the ITAP website, IITAP, they have a Find a Therapist section there that can help you find a CSAT.
Thank you, David. You hit all the points there. I have nothing to add. Yeah, it's just not an abnormal reaction at all. It's a trauma reaction, based on lack of trust and safety, and it's going to take some time and some effort to get over that. Is it true that most negative effects of meth occur during relapse, paranoia, anxiety, psychosis, etc.?
Well,
maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the negative effects of meth. And then,
yeah, because they can occur during relapse, but they can occur other times too. So methamphetamine is a really powerful, drug, a synthetic, obviously made out of pseudoephedrine and all this stuff from Home Depot, ether and acetone and battery acid and really unpleasant stuff that is cooked and frozen and boiled and baked and finally
that
produced.
Turns your teeth gray and makes them fall out. Imagine what it does to the soft tissue of your brain.
Yeah, it's not a good drug. So one of the hallmarks of meth, when you're taking it, are a lot of psychotic features, right? And by psychotic features, I mean things that would look exactly like somebody who was in a full-blown psychotic episode because of their schizophrenia or because of their bipolar illness. It looks exactly the same. And what does that look like? There's a lot of paranoia, which is really the hallmark of methamphetamine. And unfortunately, the paranoia can persist for a while, even after people give up the drugs, especially if they have a pre-existing kind of tendency toward that, or other things, depression, if they have a pre-existing depressive disorder, sometimes those depressive symptoms can persist. But there's a bunch of things that happen, the paranoia, the hallucinations, the just misreading of social cues, people there's been studies that meth users, chronic meth users, don't read the facial expressions of other people. So somebody could be smiling at them and they would interpret that as hostility. And so there's a lot of, they're kind of in their own world when they're in that stage. And that paranoia, as I say, can certainly when you're using it, but it can also, of course, happen during relapse. Relapse is particularly dangerous for meth. It's dangerous for every drug or behavior, really. But for meth, it's dangerous because meth, one of the physical things it does is really has a lot of cardiac implications. So people can get strokes, they can have heart attacks, they can have pulmonary hypertension, which is a very serious condition that meth can create. And we know from studies that more of those things occur during relapse, and the cardiac complications and death, heart attacks and strokes, and very serious damage to the heart. And that is because typically the body, as with tolerance, gets used to handling higher and higher levels. And after a period of time with abstinence, the body starts to readjust. And even if it's a lower amount than somebody might have taken if they relapse, it still really hits the body very hard. And there's a lot of damage there. But I would say the psychosis piece is the scariest, and the paranoia is really the hallmark of that.
So if somebody's having, psychotic symptoms while they're using and then they get sober for a period of time and then they go back to using, are those psychotic symptoms likely to pop up again right away?
Yeah, so meth is not any different from any other addiction, and the wisdom in the program is true, and that is kind of if you have a period of sobriety, even many years of sobriety, and kind of relapse and pick up, your disease kind of picks up right where you left off, right? And in a very serious way with the complications. And yeah, we see that totally, if not worse, because as I say, the body can't really handle it at that point, and it does get really bad. One other thing I'll mention, just people wonder about it, sometimes they get questions. There's a psychotic feature called fornication with an M like Mary, which is really the psychotic feature where you imagine bugs under your skin, and so people scratch and scratch and scratch. And so if you work with meth users who are are homeless, for example, who don't have a lot of opportunity for bathing, there's a lot of staph infections, and it gets really nasty pretty fast. But that's a very long answer to a short question. But
yeah, meth is an ugly drug. What type of, I'm pulling this out of the chat feature. What type of therapist did Dr. David mention? And where do you find someone local? CSATs are certified sex addiction therapists. And the easiest way to find one is to go to our website, hit the contact us button, and email. Tammy will tell Tammy, hey, I need a certified sex addiction therapist, and I live in Omaha. And she will say, call this person, because she knows everybody. She literally knows every CSAT in the country.
Better. Yeah.
That's the easy answer to that question. Hey, Scott. Hey, Dr. David. Hey. My question, I don't know how to love myself. Ouch. I don't know how to move forward with this process. I've hated myself for so long. I do not know how to not hate myself. I hear support from other women that they say they talk to themselves in the mirror and try to be nice. I look in the mirror with disgust. I have tried looking in the mirror and being nice, but it's proving quite difficult. Well, I really feel your pain.
Yeah, that's a tough question, a tough state to be in. I think what I would suggest there is really looking at shame and worthiness and probably trauma and neglect, because kids learn those beliefs about themselves, right? They're taught, and that can be taught through parental abuse or emotional abuse or even neglect, bullying. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we internalize that as kids, but for whatever reason, sometimes we can really start to dislike ourselves or even hate ourselves. I think speaking as a gay man, I think that's been a common experience of a lot of gay men who realize they're totally different on the inside, but it's this they realize from news and parents and peers at school that they can't really, this is a really bad thing. It's a wrong thing they can't reveal, so it becomes a secret, and it becomes this whole dynamic. And a lot of healing well, I would say a lot of addiction among gay men and probably other people as well, is really to kind of numb this self-hatred that people are feeling. And it's all about shame and low self-worth, and it's all taught to us. And so I think I'd really recommend a therapist who could help you start to dig into that. Those exercises of like looking at yourself in a mirror and affirmations, and they're all wonderful techniques, but I think they're for an easier level of the kind of self-hatred that you're describing. And I think for that, I'd really get a therapist you feel safe with, that you could explore some of trauma, perhaps, if it's occurred, but at least examine some of these core beliefs you have about yourself, because you learn them somewhere. And they usually go in pairs, meaning we learn core beliefs, I feel unsafe, I'm unlovable, whatever they are. But we also, the time we instill or internalize those core beliefs, we make behavioral decisions or conclusions. I'll never trust anybody again, or I have to do everything on my own, or and these are guides as we grow up. We're not even conscious of them anymore, but they're still kind of informing what we do. So the distress I feel when you describe that self-hatred is really painful. And so I really would encourage you to try to find a therapist that can help you work through some of that, somebody who you feel safe with, someone that you can be vulnerable with and trust, and be patient. These beliefs are wired into us for years and years and years, and they're like second nature. And so it feels kind of awkward if you've ever had the experience of trying to do an affirmation, an I statement that's a positive set of trait or statement about yourself. When you first say them, it feels totally unnatural. Like, oh, right, you want to roll your eyes and say this is crazy. But the more you do it, the more you believe it. And I think the work of kind of changing those beliefs about ourselves when they're very negative takes time as well. But stick to it, and it will happen. I guarantee it. But just you need someone to kind of guide you through that. It's not something you can just stand in front of a mirror or talk yourself out of. It takes some guidance, but it can be done.
Brene Brown writes a lot about shame and self-loathing, and she says when we have these negative core beliefs, this shame and self-loathing, it causes us to behave in ways that reinforce the negative core beliefs, and it's this vicious cycle. And it is very hard to get out of. You may want to read some of Brene's stuff because she's really good on that. But yeah, and David, is group therapy something that would be useful for somebody like this, to get the feedback from other group members who maybe have the same issue?
Yeah, it could be. Group is a really powerful place where we can really have other group members kind of be mirrors for ourselves and give us feedback. And it's often very powerful. Like group members often can hear something and accept it more clearly from another group member than they can from the therapist. So yeah, definitely a group would be a wonderful modality for this.
Yeah, and to be in a group with somebody who has like really low self-esteem and a lot of self-hatred, but I'm looking at them and all I see is a wonderful person. And I could like, eventually that might sink in that maybe everybody else is seeing a wonderful person when they look at me.
Yeah.
Okay, this is one I accidentally skipped over. Is biofeedback a way to correct the brain's synapses? So maybe David, you could talk a little bit about how the brain functions and then what biofeedback is and why it's used.
Yeah, so with addiction particularly, it has the power to kind of rewire our neural pathways and synaptic connections in a way that kind of hijacks the brain in many ways. We talk about chemsex, for example, is really this fusion of drugs and sex that have, by doing the same things over and over again, become basically one thing, one activity in the brain. And those things get kind of wired together. So in recovery, we want to get rid of the drugs, but we want to keep sex. And that's one of the big challenges of chemsex recovery, is how to incorporate healthy sex back, but leave out the drugs, because the two have been so wired together. And so as our brain creates these patterns. We know our brains are neuroplastic, which means they're constantly adapting and evolving and changing, which is kind of a different paradigm than we had 30 years ago, but we know now that they're always changing. And so what biofeedback does is really help us incorporate the body and the brain into different sensations, different feelings, and it helps us. One of those aspects of DBT that we talked about was regulation. It helps us learn to regulate different emotions, different feelings, and it's really quite powerful. And it's because we can experiment. I had the opportunity a couple months ago to be wired up a little bit. It was a thing you could get on your computer, and it was, you had to keep a hot air balloon on this cartoon aloft, and it would start to sink, I think, if your heart rate got too high. But so in a way, you kind of learn how to control your stress and keep the balloon aloft. And I crashed the balloon a number of times, and then all of a sudden I learned, wait, if I do this feeling, or if I control that, or if I think about this, I can start to kind of keep the balloon aloft. And so biofeedback is a great way to kind of take our body's information systems that they're there all the time, but we don't know how to harness them or pay attention to them. And so, yeah, I think it's a very powerful technique, totally. And as I say, it used to be quite expensive to do because you had to get all the specialized equipment. There's more and more really good things you can put on your home computer with little attachments for your finger or something that are quite powerful. So yeah, I think it's a great technique.
Yeah, I would think a great application for virtual reality goggles would be, with biofeedback.
I suspect that's coming soon. Yeah.
Anybody wants to make $1 million, go for it. There's your $1 million idea.
Right.
Okay. You use the word control when most addiction literature uses the word manage. I sometimes have a challenge with the difference. During my active addiction, I was very adept at attempting to control my activities and thinkings, but have found that managing my life is instead what I have accepted and embraced in my recovery. How might I best distinguish the difference for myself so I'm using surrender as my path to managing my life and not turning back to my will and control? Good question.
It's a great question. And I, of course, endorse, and your language is beautiful, right? Surrender as a path to managing your life and not turning back to will and control. And I agree, and I probably tend to use them interchangeably, maybe a little too casually, but control is not something, when we think of it as in addiction terms, because a lot of addicts want to try to control their behavior as opposed to surrendering to it, and it kind of can get us into trouble. And so one of the ways we sort of make that clear distinction between control that sometimes doesn't work so well for an addict is management and managing things. So I totally accept that distinction. I think in terms of what we're talking about tonight, DBT, you could say managing emotions. I think you can also say controlling emotions, because some of the things, these internal cues and triggers, I at least tend to talk about controlling some of those. You could also say managing. But if I start to hear an addict talk about controlling various aspects that are really kind of connected to the addiction of the disease, I think that we need to break the mindset that those are things that can be controlled, because that feeds right into denial. So, but it's a good point. I'll probably be more careful in my language going forward.
Yeah, it's a semantics thing, and I don't want to get too much into that, but I did want to talk about surrender for a second, because there are a lot of paradoxes in recovery, and one of them is that you have to surrender to the addiction to beat the addiction. And people get really confused by that, and I always, my response is, you're not surrendering to the addiction, you're surrendering to the reality of the fact that you have an addiction, so that you can do something about it. And whether it's controlling it or managing it, I don't care what we call it, but we're going to do something about the addiction so that it's not controlling and managing us. So I love that surrender. We have to surrender if we want to win. If we want to beat this thing, we have to give up. But we're not giving up to the addiction and letting it run rampant. We're giving up to reality, which is, I am an addict. I need some help. I'm going to have to do some certain things and live my life differently, or this addiction is going to kill me. It's going to destroy me. So Anyway, my 2 cents.
Thanks, Scott.
Can you talk about the relationships / similarities between food addiction and sex addiction? Good question.
Yeah, a great question. They're both related. They're both, of course, process addictions or behavioral addictions. We know that food, like sex, is something that we can't just give up like we can alcohol or heroin or meth, where we can just have total abstinence. But for food and sex particularly, we have to learn how to reintegrate them back into our lives, but create a healthy relationship with them. So there's a lot of parallels in terms of some of the recovery processes. How do we manage that? How do we find peace with certain things? Are there certain foods that we can't have or choose not to have? Like somebody might have an inner circle kind of behavior. I was in a partnership with a food addict for a long time and learned all about, the addictive potential of certain refined carbohydrates and that kind of stuff. So certain people choose different food plans, for example, and learn how to manage it that way. There's many avenues for that, but there's a lot of parallels in that they both are certainly things that we have to reintegrate in a healthy way into our life. But they have other parallels as well. They work in the same part of the brain, this midbrain or limbic system we've been talking about. They work on dopamine and other kind of neurotransmitters, but it's all about reward. In fact, in the old big book of AA, there's portions in there about you consciously substituting sugar if you feel like you have a need for a drink, an alcohol urge, because they understood the relationship between the two. So food is one of those things that we see can pop up in this kind of whack-a-mole system of addiction, right? We may have our alcohol under control, we may have our sex addiction under control, but if we don't deal with the underlying addictive process, it may very well pop out in food. So it's one of those things that's just another way to kind of manage feelings, to numb feelings, to deal with them, or to heighten feelings in some cases. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are there. There's also, the whole binge purge patterns you could talk about as well that are parallel with sex addiction. So I think the two go hand in hand, and something I just think the warning with whatever you may identify as the primary, whether you're a primary sex addict or primary food addict, I think we're at risk for moving into the other one in recovery if we're not careful.
Yeah, and food addiction and sex addiction, and another similarity is, food addiction is not about food, and sex addiction is not about sex. They're like other addictions. They're about escape. I'm having a feeling that I don't want to have, so I'm going to do something to trigger the pleasure response in my brain that distracts me from that feeling. Alcoholism, I don't drink alcohol because I'm thirsty. I drink alcohol because I don't want to feel, because I'm an alcoholic, and I know that works for me. It doesn't work for me anymore, but it did for a while. So yeah, I mean, they're so similar, and they're also really similar in that, our brain rewards us for eating, and our brain rewards us for sex, because if we don't eat and we don't have sex, we starve and we don't procreate, and we die and our whole race dies out. Species, what am I? I don't want to say race today. Very bad. Sorry. I didn't want to, so our brain rewards us. It's not like alcohol. Alcohol is a substance that acts on our brain. Food and sex are natural things that our brain tells us are good. Sobriety looks similar, and we got a follow-up in the chat feature. Could I make a circle plan for food? And now, for those who don't know, with sexual sobriety, we have a circle plan or a boundary plan, and we've talked about this before, but I'll go over it real quick again. The inner boundary or inner circle is our bottom line behaviors, the porn or chocolate, eating an entire chocolate cake, however you want to do it. The middle boundary is slippery stuff, driving through a certain neighborhood or being online alone after my spouse is in bed and asleep, or, wandering through the candy aisle at the grocery store might be a slippery behavior for a food addict. And then the outer circle is healthy things. For a sex addict, it would be, hanging out with my spouse and kids and, playing golf with my buddy from work, or, and in addition to, going to therapy and going to 12-step meetings and all that. And, a food addict would have a really similar thing, and, but it also might include cooking healthy meals with my spouse, planning healthy, delicious meals with my kids to bring them on board with, because they still want ding dongs and a Coke for dinner. And the follow-up here, it's been really hard to deal with food when people in my house are not respecting my boundaries with food and grocery shopping. And that's always the catch-22 for a food addict who doesn't live alone, is how do you eat according to your plan when everybody else still wants to go to McDonald's? And that's a tough one. Do you have any thoughts on that, David? You lived with a food addict.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I tended to adapt to what he needed out of just respect and helpfulness, but it's hard. I know I don't have a good solution for that, because a lot of a food addict, it's a kind of a catch-22 in a way, because you have to spend a lot of time and concern and effort about your food. You have to kind of focus on your food, which is your addiction in a way, but you need to do that to plan, to make sure you have the food you need, to have the right balance of food, and it takes a lot of energy and effort. And it's just, hopefully there's, people in the house you share that can start to respect that and be helpful with it. Because it's like any addiction, there's a visual element, there's triggers, there's cues, and if you're trying to maintain adherence to a food plan, and people are binging on snack food or junk food all around you, that's really hard. So I'm not sure what to say about that, except stick to your guns and try to do the best you can, and also get a lot of support. Like any other addiction, this requires a lot of meetings. It requires a lot of contact, a lot of daily contact with peers from your program, and it's really, a lot of people do it. It's very hard, though. It is hard.
And we see this same dynamic in families where one person is diabetic or one person has heart disease, and they need to make big lifestyle changes, including diet. And if the whole family's not on board, it's really hard for the afflicted individual to follow the plan. And there's not a lot of great solutions, but they've done research, like, when the whole family's on board, people with diabetes live a heck of a lot longer. And the same is true with heart disease. You just described the exact same dynamic. When the whole family's not on board, it's tough.
Right. And that's true.
I don't have a solution.
I've had, couples who would party and play together, right? And one wants to clean, the other one does not. And that's a really tough situation to work it out in, because you're basically around other active addicts, and that's really untenable after a period of time.
Yeah, and when the alcoholic gets sober and the non-alcoholic partner still wants to have a glass of wine at dinner but feels uncomfortable because the other person, it's this whole dynamic, and you just kind of have to work through it. Okay. Next one. Can you explain what the term compartmentalizing means in addiction recovery?
Okay, great question. So, compartmentalizing or compartmentalization really is just the ability to kind of take something and stick it off to the side, and maybe build some nice walls around it and put a lock on the door and kind of keep it over there. And I think of it more in terms of addiction than in recovery, because in the life of an addict, I think, is all about compartmentalizing, right? They may have one kind of persona they take to work with them, they're doing their job, and another one, they compartmentalize their drug behavior or their sex addiction over here. That behavior is a secret from maybe everybody in their life. There are people in their lives that know parts of them, what they're doing, but other people that know other parts. I mean, it's very fragmented. And it's a way, really the purpose of that, I think, for an addict is to protect their secrets, right? So to make sure that behavior is undisturbed and they can carry on with it. And so we really learn how to compartmentalize that very early on. I think a lot of times too, we learn as kids how to compartmentalize in certain situations, and that really creates an opportunity for addiction to blossom later in life. So for example, I spoke earlier of a young gay kid who may understand that things are wrong, and he may just compartmentalize that piece of himself over here so that nobody knows about it, nobody tells anybody about it, and later on that may be where he acts out sexually. It's in that same kind of secret behavior without disturbing his public persona. Sex addiction, same thing. You can compartmentalize your porn use or rituals in a certain ways that nobody knows about it. So one of the major tasks in recovery, I think, is to really break down those walls, right? We need to have some transparency in our lives. We need to have integrity in our lives to really have no secrets. And I think that's one of the critical aspects of recovery, at least to have some people in our lives who know everything about us. So there's no little corners of our lives that we're holding in reserve just for ourselves. And so I guess I tend to think more of compartmentalization as something more in active addiction than in recovery. I think recovery really calls for far less compartmentalization, if you will, and more integration of our lives. We don't have to tell everybody everything, but I think living with secrets and having stuff where our lives are so fragmented among different people is not just a healthy approach. Scott, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, as addicts, we are great secret keepers, and to the point where we even keep secrets from ourselves. And, you know, I think back to my active addiction, and, you know, I was not proud of my behavior. So I would stuff it in an old box and shove it over in the corner, and I would wrap some lies around it to make it okay, you know. And, you know, it was, you know, there was nothing integrated about my life. I went, you know, David hit it. I had work where I was one person at work, and then, you know, on the way home from work, when I was lighting up a joint and cruising for prostitutes, I was another person. And then when I got home and turned on the computer, I was another person. You know, and then, you know, heaven forbid, the once in a while where I had to socialize, go out to dinner with an acquaintance or something, I became another person. You know, it was, you know, nobody knew much of anything about me, including myself. And, you know, I had to, a lot of the initial work of my recovery was breaking through all of the secrets and lies that I was telling to myself and keeping from myself. I didn't have all the information, you know, and that I was only willing to, you know, pop that little bubble when my world crashed down, and, you know, everything started to fall apart. And, you know, I had no choice but to surrender and accept reality. And even then, I really fought it. You know, I just, you know, I didn't want to think about the fact that I had engaged in behaviors that had hurt other people, that had hurt myself, that had held me back, that had held other people back, that I hadn't been the good employee that I told myself I was, that I wasn't the good person that I, you know, that I told myself I was, or that I pretended to be, and that I wasn't, you know. It was rough, kind of breaking through all of those walls. You know.
That's really, you know, when seeking integrity, really one of the first things we try to do is help people kind of break down those walls and look for discrepancies and what they tell themselves, right? Where things aren't quite put together and packaged as neatly as an addict might believe or present. And so really to kind of help clear the decks on that stuff and bring some sunlight into those dark corners of an addict's life. And that's a painful process sometimes, but it's one that's necessary to do, I think.
Yeah, so I am really struggling staying sober with porn and masturbation. I'm going to 12-step meetings, praying to God on a regular basis. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, that's I think a classic thing that is such a difficult thing to do. Meetings are really helpful. I think we spoke earlier of the power of groups. I don't know if you have access to any kind of therapy-led facilitated group. I'm not beyond the 12-step groups. I think sometimes that can really be helpful in terms of breaking up the patterns, getting honest with yourself, and having other people kind of help you. It creates kind of a social support network. one of the things that we really believe at Seeking Integrity is that recovery is all about connection, and really to try to do this on your own, if you will, is not going to work. Even if you're in 12-step program, sometimes, I know I spent probably the first 2 years of my recovery surrounded by people in 12-step program, but really trying to keep as few connections as I could. And so, I mean, you maybe go into 12-step program, but really beef up the level of your social support network and really start to get help there. And also look at triggers and cues. I think it's really important to look at your ritual, you know, because the acting out is really the tail end of a whole long process of thoughts and patterns and little decisions and avoidances. And I'd kind of do a post-mortem when something like that happens and work your way backwards and see what exactly occurred. You know, was there a feeling or a thought or something you were avoiding or didn't want to deal with way back? And it can be days, weeks earlier sometimes, where we make these decisions and plan. So I think it's more complicated than just the act itself, but I think to really look at the thoughts and beliefs that underlie it, and if you're not in therapy, maybe get a therapist who can help you with that as well. I finally, I mentioned I wasn't very connected in program for a while, although I didn't relapse, but when I got a therapist finally in my second year, it's like I moved forward at a much greater rate. It saved me a lot of time and probably a relapse. So make sure you're just using all the support systems that are available to you.
The one thing I would add to that is, you know, we talked about the circle boundary plans earlier. You know, inner circle is bottom line behaviors, middle circle is slippery, the outer circle is the healthy stuff. You need to build up your outer circle with enjoyable activities, preferably enjoyable activities that involve other people, friends, family, and other people in recovery. When you start socializing and having fun in recovery, the need to act out in your addiction really diminishes. You know, it's really an inverse proportion. You know, when life gets better, addiction goes away. You know, when life starts to struggle, addiction comes back. So when there's outer circle enjoyment in your life, that will really help. So definitely build up your outer circle and try to do, you know, 1 or 2 outer circle things every day. We have more questions, but we are out of time. So save your questions, bring them back next week. We'll be here Wednesday, every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. Thank you everybody for being here. David, you want to say anything to wrap us up, take us out?
Yeah, just go over the DBT things really quickly. Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. 1, the mindfulness piece. 2, learning how to tolerate distress. 3, increasing interpersonal effectiveness. And 4, regulating emotion. Great skills.
Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll see you next week.
Bye.